Okay. All right, attendees are coming. Let me know when you want to start.
Okay, I'm just looking for the agenda, which I now have. Okay, great. So I'm going to get going.
Yes.
Okay, I'm calling to order the special meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District Board of Directors for May 13th, 2021. And the first item of business is a roll call.
Director Bragman.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Russell.
Here.
Director Schmidt.
Here.
President Kohler.
Here. Our next item is to adopt the agenda. Do I have a motion for approval?
Move approval. Second.
Do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, I see Mr. Roberts has raised his hand.
Roger, do you want to speak on the agenda?
My hand is lowered. I'm sorry, it is not ready.
We have this problem with you, but it's fine. We just want to check. Okay, so we don't have any public comment on this item, then we need a roll call vote.
Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. So that brings us to item 1, addressing the governor's proclamation on a state of emergency. Ben, do you want me to take a minute, or how do you want to address this one? Because this was added at my request at the last recently.
Yeah, I think if you want to share that this is a opportunity for the board to communicate directly to the governor's office in regards to including us in his emergency orders, including Marin County. And as the board may know, there's some work going on with the county for them to declare an emergency, but having parallel efforts will only help send the message to the governor and the governor's office that we're in a comparable drought as those other counties and believe that Marin needs to be incorporated into the emergency order. So with that, President Kohler.
So sure. So fellow board members, I asked for this to be added because given the urgency of the matter, and I wanted to be sure that we were able, obviously within Brown Act, requirements, to have a conversation about what is happening at the state level. So just to recap briefly, Ben and I have been in touch about our situation in Marin. I believe he's been talking to all of you as well. And we've been closely following the decision at the state level about declaring certain counties to be in a drought emergency. That's significant from a couple of different levels, obviously positioning counties, that are within that declaration for certain types of, or better positioning us for certain types of, federal and state financial support, as well as just the overall messaging, the importance of the message to our constituents locally. So when the recent proclamation, so of course there was an original proclamation a few weeks ago that was only for Mendocino and Sonoma. And so I think some conversations started then. I know that Ben and the staff have been in touch with Supervisor Rodoni, Supervisor Moulton Peters, and I have had a conversation about this as well. So I think the county is going to do a drought declaration. But to be clear, we are, as a special independent agency, we don't need to go through the county to be in touch with the state. So when the recent proclamation came out, extending the drought proclamation to 41 counties and not including Marin, it seemed a good time to reach out. So I've now had a conversation with State Water Resources Control Board Chair Joaquin Esquivel yesterday, as well as the Executive Director, Eileen Sobek, and one of their senior staff, Darren Polhouse. And so I wanted to relay that conversation to all of you. And then I'm also scheduled to speak today with Nancy Vogel, who is the governor's point person, as well as Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot. So I just want to let you all know about my conversations and make sure that we're all on the same page. So I'll just pause there, and then I'm happy to relay the conversation that I had with the state board folks yesterday. But do any of you have any questions for me so far? Yeah, Larry.
Did they explain why we got left off? I mean,
Oh,
we
yeah.
looked at the map and it was like, wow, what an anomaly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So to be clear, okay, so let me just get to that. So to be clear, the state board is not the primary, the state's got a lot of agencies that feed into the water conversation. So the state board's focus has been on their regulatory requirements. So their recommendations, I mean, we didn't get into this in a lot of tangible detail, but what I took away from a fairly robust, lengthy, and I will just say very positive, I don't want to say, I want to really convey that they were, first of all, they got on the phone with me right away. I mean, they've been the state has been very, very responsive to our outreach. So let's start there. They are engaging with us in a very constructive way. From the state board's perspective, it's really been about their regulatory requirements. So I believe what I took away from the conversation is that their recommendations to the governor's office, the decisions are really being made at the governor's office, is my understanding, which makes a lot of sense because it's a governor's proclamation. The state board's focus has been on their regulatory, their portfolio of regulatory requirements. So they've been really focused on the Sierra, the agencies that are, particularly dependent on Sierra snowpack, which of course is at historic lows, and the extent to which that they, as an agency, are looking to, addressing various regulatory requirements as a result of the drought. So that's been their focus, and that has not been a conversation that they've been having with us. So they were very sensitive to my raising the issue that we are in a historic drought situation, that we were the first ones out of the gate with our own drought declaration, the first ones to do both voluntary and then mandatory restrictions, and they were very appreciative. When I made the point that it was, I don't know about all of you, but I've certainly been getting texts and emails from constituents and other people locally saying, aren't you guys overreacting? The governor has now declared a drought emergency pretty much everywhere in the state, but here. And so I shared that with them, and I would say, if you can do a split take on the phone, they were like, oh, that's not where they as an agency were coming from. They have not been thinking about this from a messaging perspective. They've been thinking about this from a regulatory relief perspective. That said, they were very sympathetic when I pointed out that by excluding us, they seemed to be sending the message that Marin was just fine. So they totally understand that we're not just fine. And they are, I believe they will be coming back with some thoughts about that. They did support that, that we've been reaching out to the governor's office and to the Natural Resources Agency, and encouraged us to go forward with those conversations. And like I said, I'm set to talk to Nancy Vogel later today. So I believe, I am hopeful, like I can't report that anything has actually occurred, other than that we have definitely got our message across. And I am hopeful that that this piece of it will make a difference.
It sounds like it was more of an oversight than an intentional exclusion, really.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I do believe so.
I think Jack's idea of getting them a subscription to the IJ is the budget that we've got. It's probably not worth it, but
yeah.
Larry, I appreciate your generosity with them. It doesn't sound so much as an oversight to me. It seems like almost impossible to be an oversight. And it does include San Francisco also. So my guess is that something got dropped.
I don't believe it does include San Francisco area.
San Francisco and Marin were the two. It went right around the two counties.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it said yesterday. It said San Francisco and Marin were not included.
Right. Oh, yes. We're on the same page. So Marin and San Francisco are both not part of the declaration at this point. Like I say, they were very, I mean, you can see how they'd be focused on the counties that are getting water from the State Water Project. I mean, that's, and again, I have only so far.
Okay. So why is Sonoma in that?
Exactly.
Well,
if you use that logic, I appreciate what you're saying about the State Water Project, but how does that include Sonoma?
That was the first, right? That was the first declaration. So I can't speak to that. I'm going to say that I have every confidence in their sincerity about this. I mean, I mean, you can call it an oversight. Their feeling was we are focused on regulatory requirements, and they were looking first off at addressing those issues. So it's a reasonable place for the state board to be coming from my perspective.
Yeah.
Yes, and that would also
like I
explain
say,
Sonoma. That would also explain Sonoma because they've requested that flow relief. But
They
that
did.
might tell us we should be doing the same thing, huh? Perhaps.
Well, it might, yes, but I'm just trying to be a messenger here, guys.
No,
I just-
I'm not hassling you. I'm just
Right.
trying to get an answer, okay?
Right.
Like I said,
And-
my real comment was back at Larry, that I thought he was being overly generous to them. This is
Right.
just the accident, but whatever. It doesn't
Well,
matter
we-
if it's an accident or it's not an accident. It's done.
We were lost in the bureaucracy. I mean, that's clearly what happened. Now, what the details are, we'll probably never know, but.
Well, and I think what's important is going forward.
Yeah.
So, again, part of the reason I wanted to agendize this is because I felt it was very important that, that I convey to all of you, about these conversations in a public way. And so, to be very transparent, to get your input, and then I'll work out with Molly how I, within the Brown Act constraints, how I'm able to convey to you the results of my conversation with the governor's office later today.
On the issue of going forward, I'm getting exactly the same kinds of emails you're getting, that once again, we're overreacting. And it just diminishes the message we have been struggling to get out. If they come out now and simply say, Marin's also on the list, that doesn't do enough. And I don't know if this is possible, but if they could come back and say, however they want to characterize the oversight, say if they can add to it and say that the drought in Marin is every bit as extreme as everywhere else, and the fact that it wasn't on the list originally doesn't diminish that or shouldn't be taken away, just so we can get an attempt to get over that this isn't just catching up to us, that it's as serious here as it is everywhere else.
Okay. Okay,
Again,
I will
don't know
convey
if that's
that.
possible, but.
I can do my best to convey that.
And then I had just thought of a suggestion if for the letter, you might also want to mention that we're making water available to some of the ranchers outside of our district, so they know it's not just, our district, it's the whole county, including the folks who are not on the system.
Well, that's a good point, Larry, too, because also we're releasing the water into Lagunitas Creek to feed North Marin's wells. So that's a much bigger number than the real cattle, but it's the same issue.
Yeah.
We're releasing the water so they can pump it out through bank filtration and recover it before it goes in the ocean.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great segue to the action item here, which is that Ben and I talked about sending a formal request, which we have not done yet. So, so you guys all have the letter. I don't know, Ben, do you want to review the letter before we call for action on it?
God, I don't actually have it in front of me. Apologize for that. But the letter is generally going through where we find ourselves, the nature of the drought emergency, and the actions that the board has taken so far, that we are working with the county as well, and asking specifically to be pulled into the emergency order by the governor. So it just kind of spells it out. It's currently addressed to the governor. We're going to make sure that's the right place to send it later today. So that's the one thing that could change. But outside of that, it's a pretty straightforward, factual, 1 page, page and a half letter.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was good.
Yeah.
Looks
Yeah,
great.
I don't think we need to send a lot of information. I think Ben's right. Just keeping it short, sweet, to the point. This is what we need, and I'm sorry, I was just coming from another meeting, so I don't have it in front of me either. You do make the point, the messaging point, right? Because I do think that that's essential. I mean, that I will say that did seem to resonate very considerably with the 3 state board people who were on the phone with me yesterday. I'm like, it's very challenging for us to send the message about how dire this is. As you know, every single water district in the state to get through the drought is going to have to partner with its ratepayers, its constituents. And, that you have made that now extremely difficult for us. by basically telling the state that there's no problem in Marin. So,
Yeah.
and they were, I will say they were incredibly horrified by that. They were shocked. They were just like, it didn't for a minute occur to any of them that that would be the reaction.
I would, on that piece, we may want to enhance the language a bit. So I
Yeah.
think the action is not specifically this letter, but along the lines of the letter to give us a little room to refine it. That would be super.
I think making
Yeah,
that point,
it does
enormous-
point out that, I'm sorry, President Kohler, does point out that we've done a huge campaign to educate and bring our customers along with water conservation, but it doesn't specifically address the point that you made about not being included, making it that much more difficult to achieve that goal.
right. I would recommend that we specifically say that
Mhm.
by excluding us from the proclamation, the state seems to be contradicting. I would use that word.
Right.
The state seems to be contradicting what we are saying to our consumers about the severity of the drought, and that we're already hearing from people that they have now decided that we are overreacting because the governor has decided, because the governor has apparently made the decision that we are not in need of any support.
Agreed.
I agree with that completely.
I think it's very important to not simply imply that. We need to say that very directly. Politely, of course, very, very politely, without any, accusations, but we do need to say it very clearly.
I wouldn't
And I
say.
would just say
because of
also
the
that it does
governor's
include
decision.
as,
I wouldn't say because of the governor's decision. I would just say because of our
Whatever, yeah,
baffling
no, I wasn't
exclusion.
wordsmithing, I'm just saying, the exclusion sends a contradictory message.
yes, I think we take the point. And I was just going to point out that it does include a copy of the resolution adopting the water shortage emergency that the board took. So just that particular action with the findings is
Right.
also included with the letter.
Yeah, but I would keep it short. I think one page should be sufficient.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have any other comment on this action item? I just know that this meeting was originally scheduled to talk about the 10-year plan, and I see Melissa here, so I want to be sure that we are devoting the time we need to that. So thanks to Raf Tellez for your flexibility here and helping us get through this moment. But do we have any other comments on this before I call for, well, we need to see if there's public comment as well.
Yeah, we have a couple. Baron Hamel,
Okay.
Thank you.
go
for
ahead.
the situation regarding the governor's declaration that Marin is not in a drought. In my opinion, even before this, communicating effectively about the drought in Marin has been a challenge that hasn't been met well. Now the county has been kicked backwards by the governor's statement, so you have to overcome erroneous public perception too. Therefore, it's more important than ever to have a communication strategy and implement a program to convince people that we're in fact in a drought and steps that they must take to conserve water. To effectively accomplish this, I believe that you must apply the principles of crisis management communications, because communications shape perceptions and drive behavior, and we are in a drought. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for the
Thank
comment.
you. Next person, Paul Primo. Mr. Primo?
Yeah, my question is fairly simple. This letter that you're drafting now, was it available to the public before this meeting?
Yes, it was. It was made available earlier this morning.
On the agenda page or where?
It's the first, so if you go to our website, it's the first item after the agenda.
Thank you.
And Mr. Roger Roberts? Go ahead, sir.
Once again, my hand is down on my screen.
Okay, sir. Thank you. And that's it.
Okay. Do I have a motion on the proposal to authorize us to send this letter to the governor's office?
Sure, move approval.
Second.
All right, we're looking for a roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your flexibility in adding this item to the agenda. And thanks again, Melissa. With that brings us to the next agenda item, which is the 10-year financial plan. And I'll turn it over to Ben and Melissa.
Okay. President Kohler, board members, this is workshop 3. We had workshop 1A and 1B and workshop 2. So we're in workshop 3 and we have one final workshop to go in the development of our 10-year plan. I think you'll find today that staff has worked to integrate the feedback and comments that we receive from the board. And you'll have an opportunity today through an exercise to make further changes and refinements to the scenarios that we'll present to you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Melissa to continue her facilitation work on this. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. I just want to check and make sure that you can see the correct slide. It should be the cover slide of the presentation. You can?
Got it.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Well, it sounds like you all have a lot going on, and that's probably an understatement. So we're going to transition and talk about up to 10 years out into the future and not what's happening right now. And that's a bit of a leap, I understand. So as you know, we've been working toward the development of a 10-year financial plan. Board members, you've seen this slide before, but just for the benefit of folks that might be listening with us from the public, the financial plan focuses on the capital and operational needs and opportunities over the next 10 years. And it really is a living document that will probably evolve over those 10 years. It's not something that you adopt and have to hold to for 10 years, but it really is meant to guide your decisions out into the future and to get some consensus on where you want to head for those 10 years. So it does really prioritize all of the work that the utility will be doing for those 10 years. And it is designed to address these drivers. So it's like a financial plan is kind of like a roadmap. And for Marin Water, there are 8 factors that are driving the district to develop a plan to address infrastructure that's aging and beyond its maintenance cycle, a beloved watershed that sees more visitors every day and every year, and pressure to keep water bills affordable, climate change that impacts our future water supply, evolving customer expectations that must be met, a complex water system's unique needs, regulatory changes that are requiring investments and increasing costs to run and maintain the water system. So the work that we've done, we're going to take a little bit of a look back, and then we're going to look forward into what we're going to be working on today. We wrapped up workshop 1A and 1B earlier this year, and that's where we shared the building blocks of the financial plan. And we've completed workshop 2 in March, and that was on scenario development. Today, we're on workshop 3, and we've refined the scenarios that were based on your input that we've heard. And we're going to be progressing through one additional workshop, workshop 4, where we'll actually present the financial plan to you, that roadmap. So the workshops are all designed to ensure we hear from you. We've really been working to get that input. I'll show you in a minute what we've been doing with that and how we've been refining the scenarios. I think we were scheduled for 2 hours. We're a little bit going to be short on time, but that was really important work that you all had to do earlier. So part of my role is to keep us moving as quickly as we can through this and make sure we get all of your input. So let's take a look at what we'll be doing today and in the next workshop, and then we'll quickly take a real quick walk through what we did during the first 2 workshops. I also want to make sure that I'm referring both the board members and those of you that are in the public following along today. There was a spreadsheet that was placed on the district's website that has has colors on it. It's in the additional materials section. It might be really helpful to pull that out. That's the list of the capital projects that are in each of the scenarios that we're talking about today. It just might be helpful to have that available to you with the color coding and things. I realize in a virtual setting, this is kind of difficult. To be much easier if we were together and had paper in front of us, but that is just not possible at this time. So today, we're going to show you 2 custom scenarios that have been built based upon your input in workshop 2. And we'll be looking at the prioritized projects within each scenario. We have available, after looking at that, if you would like to do some mixing and matching of the capital projects into those scenarios, we have an exercise that we can use to do that. And we'll also be, of course, showing you the funding options for that preferred scenario. And if you do decide to mix and match, we have our financial experts on hand, and they can adapt that model and show you what the changes would look like kind of in real time. So you don't have to wait till next time to see it. We're really hoping today to get some direction and answers from you on, do we have the projects and the scenarios appropriately grouped? Which scenario do you think is meeting those drivers that we just talked about? And do we have consensus on a path forward? And again, as Ben mentioned, we're not making big decisions here. We're kind of trying to get consensus around what might be our path forward and not necessarily a defined set right there. So that is going to evolve over time. Anything over 10 years is going to have to evolve, right? So after today, we'll come back one more time and we're going to take a look at those outstanding issues that we might have. I know we need to address the sizing of reserves and pension funding, and we'll give you an overall picture of that financial plan itself. So after looking forward, let's look back a little bit just to make sure we bring our members of the public along with us on this journey. In workshop 1A and 1B, we looked at 8 different classes. We looked at pipelines, storage tanks, pump stations, treatment plants, the watershed, water supply, and facilities and capital equipment, and also operating programs. And with all of that, staff was really trying to give you a sense of a very broad look at the entire water system as it is today, its current state, and their opinions and thoughts and expertise on what needs to happen over the next 10 years to advance it, to fill the gap that we're seeing in some of these operating and capital needs. And then in workshop 2, you'll recall we introduced 4 different scenarios, and they all build on each other. So we had a baseline scenario, and then maintaining system reliability, moving toward resiliency, and then contemporary and proactive. And of course, the financial needs for each scenario build on each other too. So as you go from left to right, the scenarios become more expensive. So let's get to what we heard from you and what we did with it. We got a lot of great input in the last workshop. We definitely heard that you wanted to prioritize water efficiency and distributed infrastructure within the scenarios, and you wanted to reconsider the funding amounts that have been shown by staff. And staff has taken that into account and has provided more robust funding and programming options for conservation, and Alicia's going to show you that in a moment. We also heard you say that you wanted to understand how recycled water projects fit into the scenarios. And staff has actually added some additional recycled water options into this, and that will be gone over. Then you wanted to get into the funding of actually questions about grant funding. And the district does currently receive grant funding, and you wanted to see that reflected within the funding options. And also you were asking about identifying potentially which projects could qualify for future federal infrastructure funding. And Matt here on the district staff has been working on that, and he'll show you how they've addressed that need. We also heard on the financial impacts that we showed you that the options for, we showed you both no debt funding and also debt funding. And there seemed to be some consensus that there may be a place and a need for debt funding options within the scenarios. And you definitely wanted to discuss this more, but we'll be showing you some financial impacts with debt funding included today. And last, we did hear an interest in taking a deeper dive into the scenarios to really understand the projects that are within them. Those of you who are looking at that spreadsheet, there's a lot of stuff on there, right? There's just a lot of needs for the district. It's old and it's very unique. So there's a lot of things to be done. And what we can do today is, again, we've created an opportunity. If you want to do some mixing and matching after you've seen those custom scenarios, we can. And we're hoping that providing another look at that will give you a chance to look at what's in those scenarios itself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alicia to talk about what's happened since workshop number 2.
Morning, directors. So like Melissa mentioned, since workshop 2, staff has taken into account the key takeaways that we just mentioned, and we've revisited and refined the 4 scenarios using board input. And building off of the baseline scenario, staff has gone ahead and developed 2 custom scenarios that we'll be talking about in a couple of slides that incorporate that board feedback. These projects prioritize the North Marin Line replacement, seismic retrofits of our steel tanks, enhanced conservation and installation of automated metering infrastructure, recycled water expansion projects, water quality projects such as the installation of ozone at both of our treatment plants and the replacement of the San Geronimo treatment plant clarifier, wildfire preparedness projects, as well as some operational needs. So to quickly go over the 4 scenarios, starting with the baseline scenario, this scenario has a total 10-year cost of $248 million from fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 33. And this scenario takes into account that we are California's oldest municipal water district, and we have an increasingly complex system. We do recognize that this level of investment does not fully address the increasing age and condition of our existing infrastructure. However, this scenario does ramp up the replacement of drinking water storage tanks, such as Ross Reservoir and Pine Mountain Tunnel. This scenario also replaces 7 miles of pipeline per year, as well as 5 critical pump stations. This scenario also strengthens our water supply while adding 2 rangers to our watershed. The next scenario, maintaining system reliability, builds upon the baseline scenario for a total 10-year cost of $317 million, or an additional $69 million over our baseline scenario. This scenario upgrades and repairs vulnerable parts of our system to protect customers from various hazards such as earthquakes, wildfires, and other infrastructure failures. Specifically, this scenario replaces an additional mile of pipeline per year, as well as the North Marin transmission line. The scenario restores natural resources, adds more wildfire protection, and funds enhanced water conservation. It also provides the district with infrastructure that is more resilient to earthquakes and increases wildfire fuel reduction by 15% and upgrades wildland firefighting equipment. And finally, operationally, this scenario will provide additional training and development for our employees. The next scenario, moving towards resilience, builds upon maintaining system reliability for a total 10-year cost of $407 million, or an additional $90 million over our reliability scenario. And this scenario will allow us to establish critical system redundancy to address our aging infrastructure that is challenging our system. Specifically, this scenario will allow for a replacement of additional mile of pipeline per year, recoat an additional 12 steel storage tanks, address system-wide vulnerabilities from wildfire and earthquakes, further increase our wildfire fuel reduction by 20%, upgrade our emergency operations capability, as well as further enhancing our water conservation program. The highest investment scenario, contemporary and proactive, has a total 10-year cost of $821 million, or an additional $413 million over the resilient scenario. And you may remember that this cost was a bit smaller in workshop 2, but the real drivers to the addition of this scenario are water supply projects, including enhanced conservation, recycled water expansion, as well as desalination. This scenario will provide the district with a modern water system that meets industry standards, addresses the demands of a warming climate, while preparing us for emergency events. This scenario has a focus on improving and modernizing our water treatment systems. It will replace an additional mile of pipeline per year, includes the installation of automated metering infrastructure to enhance customer service, increases our wildfire fuel reduction by 25%, as well as further enhancing our water conservation program and installing recycled water expansion projects. To summarize, the baseline scenario will address our immediate needs of critical infrastructure and natural resources for a total 10-year cost of $248 million. The next scenario builds upon the baseline scenario and includes a focus on projects that protect public safety, extending the useful life of infrastructure, and accelerating wildfire mitigation efforts. And this scenario has a total 10-year cost of $317 million, or an additional $69 million over baseline. The next scenario, moving towards resilience, accelerates the replacement of our aging infrastructure and updates our facilities to protect natural resources, and costs an additional $90 million over our reliability scenario. The highest investment level, contemporary and proactive, modernizes the district's water system to meet industry standards, address climate change, and prepare the district for emergencies. And the total 10-year cost for this scenario is $821 million. Like I mentioned, staff took input from the board from workshop 2 and has gone ahead to develop 2 custom scenarios based on that feedback. The first custom scenario that we have to present to you today includes all projects from the baseline scenario, as well as an additional $74 million of projects for a total 10-year cost of $322 million. These projects include the North Marin Line replacement, seismic retrofits of 14 steel storage tanks, a recoating of an additional 12 steel tanks, structure hardening for 20 pump stations, the replacement of the San Geronimo treatment plant clarifier, additional wildfire preparedness, enhanced conservation, installation of automated metering infrastructure, a valve exercising program, including an employee, vehicle, and equipment, as well as the watershed recreation plan. And you can see in this middle column the various scenarios that these projects were pulled from to develop this first custom scenario. Staff has also gone ahead to develop a second custom scenario that further accelerates the identified projects that we have. And this second custom scenario includes all projects from the first custom scenario, plus an additional $78 million of projects, for a total 10-year cost of just under $400 million. These additional projects include further recoating of our steel tanks, additional replacement of critical pump stations, the installation of ozone at both the San Geronimo and Bon-Tempe treatment plants, increased funding for fuel reduction, a groundwater conjunctive use study, further enhanced conservation, as well as the installation of 2 recycled water expansion projects to both San Quentin and Peacock Gap. And like Melissa and Ben have mentioned earlier, we'll have the opportunity to do a mix and max exercise at the end of this presentation in the event that there are projects that the board would further like to prioritize. And so we'll have the chance to further develop these scenarios if need be.
Thanks, Alicia. So before we go to the financial impacts, we wanted to make sure we show these 2 custom scenarios with that to you. Were there any questions about what's in here or how staff developed these 2 custom scenarios?
I have several questions. The first is, I am really against the logic of increasing miles per year of pipeline replacement. I think it is totally illogical to approach it that way. I understand it's easy, but it's not meaningful. The way this should be done is to address the sections that need to be repaired first. And I know that's the intent, but that's the way it should be organized, not to say that we get an extra mile replaced. Say we need to replace 14 miles in the first year and 7 miles in the second year, not that we need to replace 7 miles or 9.5 miles each year. That to me, it completely doesn't wash. The second thing is, I'm going to be constrained on time, and I do not see the value of the mix and match approach on a meeting of this type. I think it takes a lot more thinking than that. I think the impacts on the rates are obvious to all of our board members. I don't think we need to see a computer program that tells us what the rate impact is going to be. If we spend 890 million or whatever the number was, it's going to have a big impact. We got that. And, you know, that doesn't mean I'm not 100% behind it. Just understand, I don't see value in doing this kind of pedantic mix and match to see what could be given up and what can be gained. I think it makes far more sense to let us think about these things. And, you know, the next time, I appreciate, at my request, the summary was put together. But, you know, guys, I'm looking at it now. It must be like 6 font size or something like that. I know it's a lot of information, but it's really hard to digest in this thing, especially when you make the most important part, the blue header at the top, the same font size as all the rest, even though it's where all the action is. So, you know, think about the users when you put these things out. I know you're all familiar with them, but to make them useful to the board, we need a more logical summary that says we don't need all this detail listed. We need to say, okay, basic is this, cost this much. And this is what I told Chuck. You know, the next one is this and cost this much. It's nice to have all this as a backup, but not as the main presentation piece of paper. I'm talking about the really busy 8.5 by 11 that I'm sitting in front of me with that came out yesterday. That's all I got for the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe, I mean, I understand your frustration, Larry. I do think we need to have some ability to look at some of these components. For example, at least as I understand the contemporary and proactive scenario, it includes things that I wouldn't necessarily think do need to go together, right? It seems to me that we've been down the road with desal, which doesn't mean it shouldn't be considered, but I'd be interested in seeing what that scenario looks like if you exclude that, because we have such a long way to go with the water use efficiency and reuse opportunities. So, you know, I do think that there can be some value in moving some of these, some of the modules that make up the scenarios around. There isn't any policy or financial reason that we have to include our most aggressive conservation scenario along with the desal scenario, unless I'm misunderstanding where you're coming from here, Melissa.
No, you're not misunderstanding.
Right. So I think that's why, you know, there is this level of detail. So, you know, that would be, yeah. I mean, I just want to say, I appreciate this new level of work. I'm not sure this is the right slide for us to be stopped on, but, you know, I'm still interested in what a scenario looks like that does not include, you know, desal and what is, you know, part of the reason we asked them to separate out AMI from other conservation numbers is so we could actually get a look at what is being proposed. And I'm not sure I still have my head around that. It still looks like we're proposing, I'm sorry, now we're looking at a different slide. Well, it still looks like we're proposing a very relatively modest level of money for efficiency, right? I mean, it's not much. It's a couple $1 million. I'm sorry, I don't really see where we are at right now with these numbers.
Yeah,
It's-
so
It's
this
ten-
custom
yeah.
scenario includes both Program A at $10.7 million, as well as the additional Program B at $1.5 million, for a total of, I believe, $12.2 million over the 10-year period.
Right, so $12.2 million, and that includes and does that include AMI?
That does
No.
not include AMI.
Okay, great.
That is
So
a separate-
$12.2 million over 10 years is still a very tiny, tiny bit of money every year, right? I mean, it's 10 years, right? So what matters is,
It's $1 million a year.
yeah,
Okay. I mean,
so
1% of our budget.
right. So I'm so sorry, guys. I feel like we haven't gotten through here. I feel that 1% of our budget over 10 years on what is arguably our most optimal source of supply. I don't understand the resistance to looking at this at a higher level. So could somebody explain that to me?
Why don't I jump in for a minute? the intent here was to provide in these two custom scenarios, one lower and one higher, what we believe the best knowledge we had of what we heard from the board. It doesn't preclude at all the board saying, we'd like to see conservation at X or Y. What we're hoping today is that the board looks at these two custom scenarios and makes changes and perhaps says, with these changes, call it. I'm sorry about that. That with these changes we may make today, that we have consensus around one of the custom scenarios. So, and we don't have desal in one of the customs because that was never expressed as an interest in the board in the 10-year plan. So,
okay, I guess there was just, I'm sorry, I may not have completely understood.
Right. Right.
There does seem to be a lot of staff resistance to providing us with scenarios with a high level of conservation spending. I mean, what are we spending? I mean, I should know this, and I'm sorry, there's just been a lot of numbers thrown at us lately. What are we spending on conservation annually right now? Isn't it close to $1 million, or maybe it's a little less than that?
In incentive wise, I don't know, Carrie, you're on. Do you know what our annual spend roughly is on our incentives, which I think is what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
I think I saw Carrie. So.
It's okay. It doesn't really matter. What I'm saying is it's a tiny, we're still at tiny numbers.
Right.
I can't get my head around it, Ben. I am not going to vote for a 10-year plan that does not have significant conservation spending. I can't in good conscience. So I can't, I don't think it's appropriate. It's not responsible.
Chuck knows, but I believe our incentives are budgeted around 300,000, and we typically spend maybe half of that roughly. So
right, that's because our incentives are not designed to actually incentivize $1 a square foot. It doesn't mean the program is failing. It means it's not an incentive. I mean, so
right. Right. So this custom 2 was an effort to increase our budget 5-fold in the incentives. But if that's not high enough for the board, that's exactly what this exercise is for, to tell us where the board would like to see it.
Okay, well, that's my input. I'm not going to be comfortable with spending less than 1% of our budget for the next 10 years on our highest and best options for water supply, reliability, and climate resilience. I'm so sorry. I just feel like I say the same thing at every meeting and we're just not getting the responses that I'm looking for. So I think I'll just leave it there.
And I believe that is exactly where we need to spend time. That kind of an exercise makes perfect sense. Adjusting the numbers around to see what changes in the dollars makes no sense to me. We're not there. We're back one level from that. We're back at the philosophical decision. That I agree with. We need to pursue that and lay it out. That is a useful exercise, in my opinion.
So Ben, the highest level of conservation spending is another 4.7 million, I think, under contemporaneous and proactive.
That's correct.
So that brings it up to about 15 million.
But doesn't that, so I guess I'm just not understanding these numbers then. I'm so sorry. All I'm seeing is the 1.5. And does the other one include AM? Because we were going to separate out AMI, which I guess is
separated out. This is just, if you look at this, mine has very tiny print.
Yeah, it's really hard to see.
If you go to the highest level,
my point exactly.
The highest
I'm just looking
level,
what's on the screen.
So the highest level is about 15 million, which is about 1.5. So maybe we need to have a conversation. What do you want to have as an annual budget for conservation? What do you think is reasonable?
I think we do need to have that conversation. And I think conservation needs to be separate from AMI. I support AMI, but you can have all the meters in the world. And if you don't have programs for people to do something with that information, meters alone are not going to change behavior. Meters give you information, which then changes behavior. I mean, which then, leads to installations of various kinds that change behavior. So I'm all in for AMI, but that's
Well,
not what's going to get us there. We need to
right,
have
so
the money to
let's
actually invest.
let's have the conversation. What's a reasonable annual budget for
Right.
conservation?
So
Right. And I
Carrie,
guess I'm
But
just
that's
not
what-
But
seeing it.
Larry,
If-
I'm not so
I'd
sure
like-
that you can do that rationally, because the problem is you need to know what you're getting for the bucks. So we need it flipped over. Staff needs to come to us and say, if we spend $10 million, we can achieve a reduction in water of 12% or whatever the number is. I don't think you can just come up with an arbitrary budget to say, well, we should throw 3 times as much money at it or 10 times as much money at it without knowing what the return is.
Terry, can you let Carrie in as a participant, please?
I'm
And
here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
then
I
she'll
want to.
to
I'd like to
briefly-
help us on this one, because I think that we want to make sure that the direction that's coming back from the board. I agree with what's being said here, so I don't want to add on, but I do want to have some clarity about how we can come at this the next time with the right kind of information. And I think Director Russell just hit the nail on the head, which is that we don't want to just randomly say what we would do for 2 million a year, what we would do for 3 million. We need a cost benefit analysis. If we invest so much in conservation, what is our expected return on water supply reliability and other benefits that can help us make an informed decision about how to right size this going into the future.
So I'd like, Carrie, what we had heard the board last time, and we probably didn't do a good enough job, where we spun water supply off into a breakout discussion. And we went through the conservation programs and the savings we get in the costs that led us to this. But Carrie, can you help pull it together a bit?
Yeah, so the scenarios that we presented to the board were developed using assumptions of very aggressive participation at various levels of investment, meaning, $1 per square foot up to $3 per square foot for turf removal. And as I said, the participation levels increased based on the additional level of investment, and the scenarios that were presented, I feel, for the next 10 years are realistic for us to have a solid investment for conservation programs, fully acknowledging that it's really dependent on participation. And developing a really aggressive program is something that we can continue to pursue. And as the water efficiency manager, I'm confident in each of those programs that were presented, to the board as far as savings potential and in levels of investment. And it does double that we're currently investing at about $500,000. We're budget $500,000 each year for conservation incentives. And so this would double our current investment.
But Carrie, the point that I think you're not getting is what Cynthia is saying. This is exactly the same discussion we had about weed control on the watershed. I asked Janet, if you had no budget restriction, what would change? And that's the part that Cynthia is trying to get across, is it not it's 500,000 to $1 million. It's what if we made this our primary focus? And we said, okay, this is our primary focus. We're going to spend $5 million or $15 million or $50 million. I don't care what the number is at this moment for discussion. That's the conversation we wish to have. You did a great job on the work that you did, but you need to open your mind up a little bit here, in my opinion, and look at it without constraints. If this were all the water district was doing to save water, I mean, think about it this way. In the short term, this year, other than Castagna, the only plan we have is you. Okay, you're it. That's the only hope to close this loop. Nothing else is going to happen in that time frame, I don't believe, to make a significant impact. So you need to, my suggestion is you need to open up a little bit and pretend that you are not constrained. Then what happens? Maybe you're happy with where you are. I don't know.
No.
But
I mean, it's a balance, right? I mean, so, at what point when we, is a $3,000 per acre foot a reasonable cost for a conservation program? Is $5,000 an acre foot? I mean, I think that
I don't think that's the way to look at it. I don't think that's the way to look at it at all. I think you don't want to shoot them down, the ideas down before they get laid out. You want to throw the idea out, let us worry about the cost per acre foot, okay? I don't even think cost per acre foot is meaningful here for this reason. If you were to convert the entire water district over to something besides grass, artificial grass, something that doesn't take water, drought resistant, I don't care what you put in there. That is the goal. How much does it cost to get to that goal? And the reason for that is it's a one and done. It's not a recurring cost. It's not something you're going to say, oh, well, next year we have to spend it too. No, once you spent it, you spent it. That's the beauty of your end of the stick. It's the same with reclaimed water. With reclaimed water, you know, yeah, it costs money to build a pipeline. Yes, it costs money to supply the water, but the customer pays for that. The pipeline is the capital cost. Here, you've got an opportunity, and I say, my point is you should operate without handcuffs, without constraints, without trade-offs. Propose to us whatever you think will work, and let us come back at you and say, oh, no, that's just fairy tale dreams. You know, that ain't going to happen. Okay, then it's on us, but it's not on you. We need to get you all your thoughts. And if it's 3,000 acre foot, it's 3,000 acre foot. What's the cost of water when we have none? You know, we're going to start trucking it in at, 6,000 gallons at a pop, you know.
Well, it sounds like we need to have a different conversation than the one we planned. I think we're we're all nodding, right?
Well, I think, Melissa, we have work to do on conservation, but I don't know that we can't get a sense of, are there other projects in the custom scenarios that shouldn't be there, or that are there projects not there that the board would like to see there? I think some of that may be useful information for us to continue this refinement process.
I'd like to, I think that let's maybe come to that, but I want to, something along the lines of what we've just been talking about in terms of conservation. I want to pick up on something Director Russell brought up as well, which is this number of miles of pipeline, and something that I've been trying to convey, and I think probably maybe not clearly enough. And so I hope to have that we can take some time to discuss this, which is we have a number of miles of pipeline and other infrastructure that needs to be replaced today. If we had the money, if we had a blank check, we had no constraints on being able to replace things. There is a certain amount of our current infrastructure that needs to be replaced now. Next year, there will be additional infrastructure that needs maintenance or replacement. In order to understand our increasing investment in these scenarios to address miles of pipeline or other maintenance, I would like to really understand better how much each increasing scenario is chipping away at our current need today that we would replace today, plus catching up on every passing year. There will be additional infrastructure maintenance or replacement that we will need to address. And to be able to understand our investment in that area, I personally would like to understand better how much that investment is really chipping away at our existing challenge, as well as closing the gap on what we need, what we'll have to do into the future. I don't know if that, is something that we can get in the next round of analysis. And Director Russell, is that, and I want to characterize the question you were raising about number of miles, but is that addressing what you're trying to get at?
Exactly, Monty. You hit it right on the head, and put it far more articulately than I did. The bottom line is, this is a brainstorming session as I see it. And I think, Ben, this thing needs to be divided into two pieces. We have an urgent short-term problem. I'm actually uncomfortable talking about 10 years out when I'm worried about 10 months out. And I am getting very concerned After looking at Paul Cellier's presentation 4 times, I have it down now by memory. And some of the scenarios that he projects are absolutely frightening to me in terms of residual water storage in the December. So I think while this is a great exercise in the future, and I'm not criticizing that at all, there are short-term problems and long-term problems. And I think that should be another scenario laid out in this 10-year planning process, is that let's look at, you could break it up any way you want into the first 2 years versus the last 8 years, or the first 5 years versus the second 5 years, or whatever you want. But the bottom line is, I think that Monty's right on the right track, that, you know, this arbitrary stuff, it's like I complained the other day about the 25% replacement of the plastic laterals. While I understand the logistical advantage of something like that, it doesn't make any sense. If we're experiencing leaks, we have to replace them all, then we should be looking to replace them all, not 25%. I mean, what good does it do to replace? It's like saying, I got 4 bad tires on my car, I'm going to replace one of them. Okay, well, good luck. You got a 3 out of 4 chance that the other 3 are going to fail. You know, that's not good engineering to approach it that way. Either we have a problem or we don't have a problem. And if we have a problem, it needs to be accelerated and looked at in that format. I mean, like throwing redwood tanks in with pipeline replacement, to me, you know, that it's totally apples and oranges. And even the San Geronimo clarifier replacement, that is a long-term problem of a potential design error by Kennedy Jenks that resulted in the failure at Rinconada. We got that. But what is the risk of the earthquake? I know we don't know that, but the point is, what is the relative risk? It's been here. That design survived the Loma Prieta earthquake. It's a good design. It just has a little missing part when it comes to the clarifiers. Not the clarifiers.
The wells.
Well, not the baffles. Yeah, whatever those things are called. There's a name for them, but launderers. And so, you know, that's the part that's confusing me. You know, is it, I understand the desire to get a nice piece of paper and a plan and all that, and that's all great. And it's nice to know that we're looking at $800 million. But Monty's question is exactly the question that I've been asking since I joined the board. We keep spending money. We never seem to get there. Now, I'm not criticizing the expending of the money. I'm saying the question he's asking is, are we chipping away at the problem or not? The goal post seems to move as fast as we can pay it down. Maybe that's inflation and it's just life. But it's also something we need to consider is, how do we get to where we need to be? Because I don't think this plan is going to work on that basis, unless you're proposing we go out and get an $800 million bond, which would take some pretty good effort on our part.
And I want to be clear. I know that this is a challenging exercise, and it's quite possible that some of these scenarios actually do address this challenge that of addressing our maintenance needs. We just can't see it in the data, and so I think in that way it may be there, but we just need to have it spelled out more clearly. But that, if when we come back together next to look at some scenarios, and we can really, like with the conservation work, see some underlying analyses about how we are chipping away at that problem over time with these different scenarios or different ones. That's obviously a priority that I think we're trying to express, that I will say for myself, I will be looking to support a 10-year plan that is chipping away at that problem at some reasonable rate, so that we're not deferring that problem down the road to future generations to have to deal with the situation. So being able to understand that, I think that will be important to our customers to understand that we're doing the right kind of maintenance to have a safe, reliable water supply now and into the future.
Well, I'm trying to just think about, but maybe we're going to have to think about where we go from here and how to bring back, because it's complicated, obviously. And I think what we've tried to do through the prior workshops is build these building blocks and look at every asset class, look at recoding tanks, look at higher levels of investment of recoding, how we would start to get out of the deficit and when we would get there. We looked at pipes, and that's a daunting issue because from an engineering standpoint, the cast iron pipes that unfortunately dominate our system are the targets for replacement. And even the highest level of investment doesn't get us where, from an engineering standpoint, we probably would want to go. So the challenge is, but what we're up to work through it is the highest level of investment, the modern utility, probably is the best reflection of where staff would, in an unconstrained resource way, reflect where we should go, but we don't have unconstrained resources. So what we're trying to do is chip away, and pipes, it is really just chipping away almost at any investment level, but we're trying to take a balanced approach to all the different asset classes. And absolutely, there's apples and oranges, because it's very difficult to compare from a risk standpoint, seismic, ozone treatment for taste and odors, cast iron pipes, recoding tanks, and the list goes on, in a way that seems intuitive and logical. And that's a challenge we have, and I appreciate that. So we'll have to think about, and again, right now, I don't have a clear vision of how we're going to bring back what I think some board members would like to get through and really have a deep appreciation of on every asset class. But we have the data, we have the information, most of it. We've just packaged it in the prior workshops, and each one of those went on ours. So we need to figure out a way to summarize that and show how those building blocks lead to these scenarios in the different asset classes. Everyone knows we have a very old system that's showing its age, and we have a, investment opportunity or investment deficit, however we want to characterize it. But we do have that one factor, and it's a dominating factor, which is affordable rates, that we're just trying to think about as we're bringing options and considerations for the board. So we thought these two scenarios that were created based on board input kind of probably hit the right mark in terms of the balance outside of the conservation. And we heard those comments, and we can bring that back. But we thought those two scenarios reflected generally the sentiments, the interests that we heard of the board, and give us that balanced landing place to, we aren't etching in stone this plan. And that's the other point. I think as we get into the finalization of the plan, there's a sense of the consequences of decisions, and that may be bogging us down. And I would just suggest this is going to be a living document. It's a framework. Really, what's the greatest value is the education of the board on what's out there, of the public, what's out there, and for staff, getting the feedback on the interests and priorities of the board. And to me, that's gone very well. And I find that's the success in this effort, and that's the richness. So to me, that's a place for us to think about, and perhaps not get so concerned that the decision we're making is going to be final and etched in stone for the next 10 years, because it's not going to be. we're going to be reviewing this plan on an annual basis and adapting it based on emerging priorities, new thoughts, new opportunities. So I don't know with that, if there's thoughts, does it make sense to take a look at these two and see what we planned is to see if there's projects we did here on the conservation. Are there other things in these two scenarios that we created, these new ones based on feedback? Are there projects or elements that you'd like to see in there that's not? We certainly heard, and we can bring back to the next workshop what it means in terms of gaps in getting us out. I think for the most part, it's going to be, yes, we're on the right trajectory, but no, we are not done. And I think it's fair to say we're never going to be done because the system's going to continue to age and we won't, I believe, be able to afford, but I don't believe we need to do, a massive renewal program like you see San Francisco's multi-billion, lack of investment, kind of a boom or bust versus getting on the right trajectory, increasing our level of investment thoughtfully that's managed and, adapted on a biannual basis based on the input and direction we're getting. So Melissa, why don't we try to just see where it goes on looking at those two scenarios, and are there things that perhaps should be in there that aren't, or that are in there that don't resonate in terms of relative priorities?
Before we go on, and I think it's fine to kind of shift gears if, to get through this, but maybe we should plan a separate meeting on conservation, and do a 10-year, devote an entire meeting to that and really get as much as we can on the table.
You know what? I'm so glad to hear you say that, Larry. I was going to suggest exactly the same thing. I think this has been the sticking point here. And I hear your frustration, Ben, and I don't mean to derail us because there are a lot of other projects we need to be working on over the 10 years. But I think, I think we do need to get on the same page. I think Larry's exactly right.
And actually just, I don't intend and I don't feel frustrated because for me, this is exactly what we're looking for and need. I'd be far more concerned if we weren't getting direction and input and feedback. So it's a process and we're good with it and appreciate the feedback and where your interests are and what you need. And we're capturing everything that's being said. So I actually really appreciate it.
Can I make one
Second quick point. I look at it as sort of a planning process, and a budgeting process, and sort of putting some kind of framework around our budget, actually, not necessarily the specifics,
right?
But that another aspect of it would be at some point we got to look at getting some kind of bond financing if we want to go to the higher level. And that may be the subject of a whole nother meeting too, sort of a special breakout meeting, because, we can leverage our assets that way, our revenue that way. So
I would build on your comment in many ways. Right. It is kind of a budgetary planning effort, using projects in the asset classes to help guide it. So the thought is we go from this 10-year plan, and that gives a starting point for the next cost of service analysis. Because for the cost of service the next COSA, you need to know what costs you're spreading among your classes and your rate base. So we would take what comes out of this, which is the high level kind of budgetary planning, use that for the COSA process, and we have this as a foundational framework. that then through further discussions with the board, probably this time next year, we'd be talking about the COSA and the potential bonding and rate needs to meet the investment levels that we want to proceed upon. So this effort, it doesn't stop. It is linked ultimately to the next budgeting and rate setting process via the COSA in between. So this is going to be an ongoing discussion with the board and the public for, the next 18 months or so. So it's not a static effort, and it's not finished once we finish the 10-year plan. It really has only just started at that point, and it gives staff a good indication of what to be thinking about for the next cost of service analysis.
And just one final 30-second comment. Conservation, I think, ultimately is the way to resilience for Marin Water District. If we can get our annual consumption down to 20,000 acre feet or under, we may become resilient, and conservation is the way to get there. So I don't want to kind of put that off as some little special item. I think it's really the most important thing we can do, because that will change Marin's way of looking at landscape and the whole watershed. So that is a critical, if not central, component. And, I do appreciate Cynthia's articulation of it, and Director Russell. So I do really think that is the challenge, is whether we can really encourage that and really kind of change the direction for Marin Water District and Marin County residents.
Okay, so Ben, just so I'm understanding where you want to head now, did you want to talk about the financial impacts? Are you ready for that, and the information about grants?
Well, I think as Director Russell said, I think there's a general understanding of the financial impacts, and maybe we would, I think the grant information would be useful to touch on with the board, and then going into the two scenarios that we created, and just get a bit more of any feedback or input from the board to help us design where we go from here.
Okay. Well, let me pull those two slides up so that everyone can see. All right, so you're seeing potential grants. And I believe, Matt, you were going to go over these two slides of how you looked at this.
Yes, good morning, board members. It's Matt Sigas, the Grant and Legislative Program Coordinator. As Melissa mentioned at the start of the presentation, based on the board's feedback from the last workshop requesting that we identify a number of district projects that match well with state and federal funding opportunities, I'm going to briefly run through the potential funding sources and the district projects which may match well with them. So due to the state's current budget surplus, there is a large amount of proposed funding available for grant programs that is in the process of being appropriated. Competing proposals by the governor's office, as well as the state and Senate Assembly, are looking to address the most pressing issues in our state, including threats from drought, wildfire, and infrastructure improvement. Specifically, the Pond Tunnel and Ross Reservoir replacement projects would be candidates for water loss funding or water resiliency funding, which under proposed budgets in the state Senate and governor's office would be administered by the Department of Water Resources. AMI has several potential sources depending on how proposed spending bills at the state and federal level are passed and appropriated. After the district completes our local hazard mitigation plan in 2022, we will be eligible to seek funding for projects from FEMA, including seismic retrofits of treatment plants and emergency power generators. And there's projected to be a large amount of funding available at the state level for recycled water infrastructure expansion, particularly for shovel-ready projects in the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. Wildfire preparedness and fuel reduction funding is currently available from CAL FIRE and the State Coastal Conservancy. Staff have several applications pending for some of this funding. The state has prioritized funding for disadvantaged communities through integrated regional water management. Staff is planning an application this fall for pipeline resiliency funding in Santa Fe's Canal District. Additionally, we expect to see funding for fleet electrification and bay or brackish water desalination in next year's state and federal budgets. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Matt on this?
It's just, maybe just a comment. I mean, this looks like a pretty robust, a robust set of opportunities. I'm sure you haven't had a chance to, well, I'll just ask, have you had a chance to look at the current proposal on the federal side for, I think it's 50 billion. I mean, obviously it's hard to know how that would, eventually trickle down to us, but I'm assuming that that's not included in your analysis so far.
Yeah, my expectation for some of the federal proposals is they would refill some pots of funding, such as WaterSmart, with the understanding that a WaterSmart program, for example, if it was used for AMI, would require a 50% match on the part of the district. But I would expect, President Kohler, there will be opportunities from existing programs.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest pots, I mean, I think you're right, there'll be some WaterSmart money, but I mean, the biggest programs, it looks like there's going to be gazillions of dollars going through the SRFs, which gazillions, being a technical term, but that's obviously national. So it's hard to know what will come to California, although the number I've heard from California seems high. So have you looked at the current thinking about SRF funds coming to the state in addition to WaterSmart and other littler pots like that?
Yes, and I think we continue to talk about it. SRF would be a discussion on its own. I think it's important to mention as well, when you look at federal appropriations, for example, we received notification from AWWA this week that the U.S. Treasury is going to release a $350 billion allocation under the American Rescue Act this week. However, as I've mentioned in past presentations, one problem we have is eligibility. The County of Marin will likely receive $50 million based on that allocation this week, but it goes to the county, and we as a special district are not eligible for that money, which can be directly used for water infrastructure. So it's not just a question of eligibility, but how we would apply it.
Yeah. No, I agree, but I think those funds aren't going to the SRFs. I think we are eligible for all SRF money.
We are, correct.
Right. So what I was saying is that there's a lot of conversation about moving a lot of money through the SRFs. I mean, I totally understand, and a lot of us have been talking on the federal side about not limiting those American Rescue funds just to cities and counties, but I mean, that is what it is. And I assume that you're in conversation with the county about that, but do you have a prognosis, or is it fair to put you on the spot for that about the SRFs? I mean, I understand they're loans, but they're very low interest loans. It's I think it's possibly even a better rate than we could get with our own municipal bond financing.
Yeah, I would generally agree with you that there is a tremendous amount of money that will be available for SRF. So if that's the direction I get from the board or general manager to pursue that, I think we'll definitely go in that direction.
Well, I don't know. Let's open it to the board. I mean, is there any reason not to? I mean, it just seems like an incredible opportunity.
What are SRFs?
Oh, I'm sorry. The state revolving funds. These are kind of the most stable and the largest federal pots of money for water infrastructure. So the Clean Water Act and the Federal Clean Water Act and the the Federal Drinking Water Act, they both set up state revolving funds. So there's two of them, one for drinking water, one for clean water, which is really treatment and stuff. But they're the overwhelmingly largest pots of federal money. They are, for the most part, low interest loans, but there is a lot of conversation now about converting some of that to grants. And generally the SRF terms, so, and they're administered through the states. That's why they're, so California gets a big allocation. I think California gets the biggest one in the nation, somewhere around $500 million annually. But because those programs are so well established, they've been around for 40 or more years, the bureaucratic infrastructure to move them out is very, very, very well established. So my understanding, at least, is that the federal government is thinking about moving the bulk of the money for water infrastructure through the SRFs. And Matt, you may be following that.
I agree with you. It's correct.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like something we should be pursuing.
Yeah.
It's the same way, Larry, that they funded the Clean Water Act monies for the treatment plants, for the sewage plants.
Yeah. That's what
they all came through SRFs.
Yeah. Right. That's what the clean water SRFs are mostly for. But those eligibility requirements are expanding to include specifically, AMI and other conservation and, watershed protection. I mean, they're getting much broader. In fact, there's a whole green reserve. So 10% of the SRF funds have to go to environmentally sustainable approaches. Anyway, so I don't want to get down that road too far, but I would think, that there would be no reason not to be pursuing those opportunities. So if Matt and Ben are looking for board direction on that, I hope we can provide that.
Yeah, I think, of course, that we're interested to pursue that. It's a loan, it's not a grant, so you just want to make sure you're getting money, as you said, President Kohler, cheaper than you could otherwise. I'm also aware many agencies historically, and maybe that's our history, have not pursued because of all the paperwork and tracking.
Yeah, the paperwork is horrendous from the Clean Water Act.
They have streamlined. I understand they streamlined their processes, and I've heard from a number of agencies that are tapping into it. It's gotten much, much better.
It has gotten much better. And a lot of that's happening at the California level. They've also moved the SRF from one place to another within the state of California. I think that's now being administered by the state board. And I think that's made a big difference in the state of California.
Well, it was a state board that administered the wastewater, but just keep in mind also that it was 87.5%, huh? So 12.5% was eaten by the state on the Clean Water Act funding. So you borrow $1 million, but you only have to pay back 870,000. I assume they're going to follow something like that, where the state kicks in money too.
I'm just saying we should pursue. I'm not saying we should make a decision. I'm just today looking for. Matt seemed to be looking for board direction, and I'm just saying I think, we can make a decision about whether or not to actually submit an application down the road. But I think it would be great to set Matt free to, figure out whether it would be a good idea for us to do so.
I would, President Kohler, consider that done.
Okay, great.
The other thing, Matt, I'd like to ask you from the board standpoint is there anything you need from us or from the district to do a better job or to make your job easier to achieve a higher percentage of success?
I don't believe so. I think, like our general manager said, I'm getting the direction I need at this point.
Matt, as far as Ross Valley tank replacement project, that also is a fire prevention asset. That was one of the primary criticisms of the lack of storage on that end of the system. So it's just another angle maybe to pursue. I don't know if there's another funding source. On the disadvantaged communities, I was contacted by folks in Marin City who are doing the shore up sort of environmental review of the situation down there. And there's definite interest in seeing what needs to be done. And I know Ben and Paul are looking into it. And it's just something I think that needs to be on your radar. I'm not familiar with the disadvantaged community funding, but that is another area in our district that might qualify.
Thank you. I agree. That's an area that we've been keeping in contact with Short Marin, And our engineering staff has been working on scoping both disadvantaged communities for potential infrastructure replacement. And yes.
Good.
Ben, you wanted to get additional feedback on the 2 custom scenarios. Would you like me to put those slides, those 2 slides up again? Yeah, okay. Hang on here. Okay, you should be seeing custom scenario number 1. And I think we definitely received feedback on conservation. Sounds like we need to have a totally separate conversation on that. Were there other pieces in here? I mean, we had definitely heard moving that North Marin line replacement forward was something that was important to the board to prioritize.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. You're seeing more funding moving forward and being prioritized for wildfire preparedness in here as well. In the watershed, there was a lot of discussion in our previous workshops about that. So that's why staff moved that forward. Same with being prepared for earthquakes in the structure hardening and the seismic retrofits.
So on the next one, the recoding tanks, maybe Alicia, could you just give us a little bit of what that gives us in terms of our kind of backlog compared to what's in scenario 2?
Yeah, so in the baseline scenario, I'll just start there because that's part of what custom scenario 1 is composed of. We currently have, without any scenarios, we currently have today 31 tanks that are overdue for recoding. And this is based off of a recommended industry interval of recoding tanks every 20 to 25 years. So there are currently, I believe, around 75 steel tanks in our system composed of welded steel and riveted steel that are eligible for recoding, or that the district has elected to recoat. And 31 of those tanks are overdue for recoding today. In the baseline scenario, if we only were to recoat the tanks that are listed in the baseline scenario, which are comprised of the Alto tanks, 2 tanks there, as well as 8 additional tanks, there will be 43 tanks that are overdue for recoding at the end of the 10-year period. With this additional 12 steel tanks to recoat, we would come back to, at the end of the 10-year period, 31 additional tanks. So while we won't necessarily decrease the gap, I would say that we are improving the status of that asset class, in that I would say the length of time that we are overdue for recoding has shrunk. So you could look at it in a number of different ways. Even though that number is the same, the range at which it is overdue has actually shrunk down. So if you were to imagine like a bell curve of sorts, that number has been brought more towards the center. And then if you were to go into the second custom scenario and add in an additional 10 tanks for recoding, that number would drop to 21 tanks that would be overdue for recoding. So that number would then drop from 31 to 21. So that gap in the number count would decrease. Are there questions on that?
That's extremely helpful, Alicia. Thank you for that. And I would just say that that's exactly the kind of information that is, for me at least, is very helpful to understand the reasoning behind increasing investments to close the gap on our existing needs. So thank you for that. And if that's indicative of the kind of things that we'd like to see when we explore replacement of other infrastructure, that's the kind of information that would be very helpful for me.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to emphasize that I'm right there with Monty, and thanks for being so articulate about that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the sort of thing we need on each category right down the line. I mean, it's the most valuable thing I heard today, quite frankly.
Except that I don't think we need a comparison to industry averages. That's not relevant. What's relevant is what is the condition of our tanks.
Exactly.
You know, it's fine to say that average cars are replaced every so many years, but it's your car that matters, not what the average car is. I understand from a planning standpoint, this is an easy way to do it. I got it. But what we need is the Smith Ranch saddle tanks. Smith saddle tanks needed recoating. Okay, so that's being done. We need the tanks ranked, not to say, well, we're behind on 32 out of 60, 140, whatever the number is. You know, it's just not helpful to me, that kind of thing. It's an easy way to think about it, but it's not really meaningful.
I beg to differ on that, Director Russell. To me, I think what you're saying is that the industry standard isn't necessarily something that you hew to without some intelligent thinking, but it's a consistent metric that allows us to compare different scenarios. And I find it helpful that we're using a consistent standard that we, of course, then need to apply some careful thinking and some experienced thinking, but it is a standard that is explainable to others. And so
that's true.
For that reason, I appreciate it.
That's true, Monty, but it's too simple-minded. That's my point. Do you think a tank in Phoenix, Arizona and a tank in Seattle are going to experience the same coating issues over the life? You know, if it somehow were geographically tied to us, maybe. But you know, the sun is a lot stronger in the South, and paint's going to last less time in the South than it is in the North. So
if I could just jump in briefly and share that, right, this gets into, are we developing a capital plan or kind of a budgeting planning document? And it's really the latter. In terms of what tanks get coated, that's done on an ongoing basis based on absolutely the condition. And staff is never going to be obviously recoating a tank that doesn't need it. Our deficit on recoating based on both industry standards and conditions, as you saw with the Smith saddle tank, we're behind the curve. So getting to tanks that don't need it is really not a concern that we have. It's how much are we going to put in the asset class of tanks relative to the other asset classes to try and slowly get on the right trajectory for all asset classes to bring us up. But it may be useful, Alicia, if we go back to custom scenario 1 and on the pump stations, I see we have hardening, but maybe you can do a similar, just as an exercise of what we have in baseline for pump stations versus custom scenario 1 and 2 and what we're getting for that higher level of investments.
Yeah, so for the pump stations, in the baseline scenario, we have namely reactive maintenance, pump replacement, so not pump station replacement, but actual pump replacement, as well as the refurbishment and replacement of 10 pump stations. As we get into the higher investment levels, we start to incorporate things like structural hardening. And we heard from the board that our wildfire preparedness was of key importance. And so this structural hardening really gets to that point in that it refurbishes certain pump stations. And we've identified about 60 pump stations that are within the WUI, or the wildland urban interface. And of these 60 pump stations, there are 20 identified in this first custom scenario that would utilize non-combustible materials such as masonry blocking as opposed to wood siding and various screening and vents of that sort. And while this custom scenario does not address all of the pump stations that we have identified as a need, it does address a large number. So it does reduce that gap by nearly over 30%.
Did you want to add what happens in scenario 2 or the custom scenario 2, Alicia?
Yeah, sorry.
For pump stations?
Yes, so in custom scenario 2, you'll see there's that structural hardening that is identified, and there's also an additional replacement of the five additional pump stations. So we have, I believe, over 100 pump stations in our system, and they are of various sizes and of various ages, serving different numbers in our community. So you can envision like a transmission pump station serving a whole section of our service area, all the way down to what we would call a distribution pump station that would serve a higher level system or the upper portion of a hill. And so these 5 critical pump stations would be more of the transmission types of pump stations. And we would make sure that these pump stations both are in need of work and replacement. But while we are undergoing the replacement, we would ensure that they are sized for the system that we have today. Because like we all know, we have a very old system, and the system that we have today would not be the system that we designed for if we had a blank slate. And things have changed over time. Our system has grown. Our assets within 900 miles of pipeline, they serve various parts of our system. And for example, one of our pump stations in San Rafael has become more and more critical in providing water from Sonoma towards the southern parts of our system. And it wasn't designed for that originally. And so if we were to go and replace that pump station, we would ensure that it has the capacity that we need for today and into the future to make our system more resilient in that area.
Was did that help tell that story a bit better for the board as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a list of the 5 critical pump stations. I just out of interest, not out of, it just be interesting to see where these critical gaps are in the system.
So when we think of our system, the dominant asset class in terms of replacement value is certainly pipelines, and that is probably worth a separate discussion. And then we have the tanks and pump stations. And then most of the other elements you see here are sort of one-off. So the clarifier we've talked about a bit. We have 3 of these clarifiers designed the same way, and we are aware they do have seismic vulnerability. It's been actually demonstrated. And so this is to, I do believe it's prudent for us to think about upgrading one of them. Not all 3 necessarily, but we do one. So if there is a seismic event that creates the nature of the waves in the clarifier that are known to damage the weirs and the well there, we'd have at least one clarifier operational. Some additional wildfire preparedness, enhanced conservation we've talked about. AMI, we've moved up from the most expensive to recommend that we do invest in that. As we all know, the drought has really kind of given us a pronounced understanding of the value in AMI during water shortage periods. We had talked about valve exercising, actually another very significant asset class. And we do need to do this, or we'll just be in a valve replacement for a very long time. And then the watershed recreation plan we've talked about. So those are the elements that we've added to this custom scenario based on prior discussions that we think, and that this falls between the reliability. We can show where it falls. I believe we have a summary slide after this. But if we go to custom scenario 2, the additional ones, we talked about the pump stations and the recoding. We've added ozone because there's been some interest. It's very costly. It's more of a level of service to eliminate taste and odor concerns that we get seasonally, and potentially will be more pronounced as climate change continues and the water gets warmer. And then also, with water shortage, potentially it even gets warmer. So this could be a tough year for us. Looking at potentially increasing the BIFA, the fuel reduction work that we do. Thinking about groundwater conjunctive use as a nice direction to think about in terms of water supply resiliency. We've talked about conservation, and then we have the 2 recycled water projects that we're going to be very aggressive pursuing grant funding for. So these are the 2 custom scenarios that we developed based on board feedback. I'm interested, based on the past workshops and the information you have, understanding some of it's very small font, apologize for that. Are there projects in here that don't resonate as to a landing place you'd like to see, or projects that you believe should be here if we think about these 2 custom scenarios as potential places where we get some measure of consensus? We do have the financial implications we could jump to and show. What about the slide, Melissa, that shows all 6 scenarios with the revenue, so they can kind of see where these 2 custom scenarios fit?
Yeah, let me put that up for you.
Motion.
Yeah. This is the right one, right, Chuck?
I think that's the one Ben's referencing.
Right. So the custom scenario 1, in terms of total cost, you can see it's between the reliability and the resilience scenario, close to reliability. And then custom 2 is still between those 2 brackets. And you can see where that falls.
Yeah, our feedback in our last workshop was, wow, we have great bookends, but we need something more in the middle, right? So
I don't know why
they were doing.
We're including the 35 million for ozone. I would take that out myself, and the San Quentin, I think that's kind of a Hail Mary, but.
Why do you say that?
Because we would have the state, are we talking about direct potable use to San Quentin?
Maybe,
No,
but not now, I'm sure.
No, this is recycled water to San Quentin. It's a target for grant funding, because we do believe there's going to be available funds, and it's a high capital cost relative to what we get, but I'm not in any way arguing against it. But with some grant funding, it adds to our recycled water portfolio.
So they would have to double plumb the prison, which,
Right. That all of these have a set of, we'd have to work, certainly.
Anyway, I would take out the ozone, just myself, if we're looking at sort of getting this thing in a more manageable range. I think our water taste is pretty good. I know there's some seasonal issues, but I just think, wow, that's a lot of money for that. And it's very energy intense as well. So,
yeah, and it is in addition to the capital, just noting it uniquely of all these projects, it would be a pretty good hit to the operating budget as well in the energy.
I think that's exactly the wrong way to look at it. It's not a luxury. You haven't been exposed to ozonated water. All the European countries ozonate their water. Now, there are a variety of reasons for that, but the primary one, and I think the best term I've ever heard, is it makes the water sparkle. It is an absolutely far more efficient means of disinfection, ozonation, and it is very effective without producing disinfection byproducts. So it's got a lot of other things going on besides making the water look better. But the thing I think we should not forget here is, as we draw our reservoirs down further, these are problems. Ben hit it right on the head. They're going to warm up. And they're going to warm up because there's less water in them. And that's going to increase the algal growth. And then the algae have less place to go. So their concentration is going to get up and up and up and up and up. And when you've been exposed to a good geosmin blast, I guarantee you, you will never forget it. It has a residual effect on the user that lasts forever because it has this kind of musty odor that you just can't get rid of it. So anyway, I don't think, I'm not pushing one way or the other about whether we include it or we don't include it, but I think to brush it off as a aesthetic issue and the water tastes pretty good, I don't think that's the way to look at it.
okay.
Well, Ben, we're getting close to time. I don't know if President Culler, we want to check and see if there were any public comments that you want to add.
I was actually gonna, thank you for going there because we only have a few minutes. Terry, how are we looking on public comments?
I have one so far. Phone number ending 0596.
Okay, why do we go to that now? I have a hard stop at noon, so I'll be,
Okay.
I can't go over, others may be able to, but let's go to that public comment now.
Okay, go ahead. You can go ahead.
Hi, my name is Shirley Fisher. I'm a resident of San Rafael. I have a very major concern about another scenario that needs to be added to your plan. Please take a moment and listen to this customer perspective. As the MMWD board, you are asking customers as an emergency measure to decrease their water consumption overall by 40%. You're relying on these conservation measures to provide enough water to your customers in this drought year. You also acknowledge that due to climate changes, drought conditions will continue and become more frequent occurrences, requiring the same or additional conservation measures in future years. At the same time, we're hearing that you are assuring the county and municipalities that you will be able to provide sufficient water supplies for 14,000 additional housing units that the state is mandating to be built in Marin County in the next 10 years by 2030. There is a disconnect here. There's an elephant in the room that is being totally ignored in your financial planning. What additional water resources do you need in order to supply 14,000 additional households? Do you expect conservation measures to cover this increased need? Or will you have to build desalination plants or ask surrounding counties to share their additional water with you? Who will bear the cost of creating these additional water resources? How much will water bills be increased to secure additional water? And most important, and this is in your general overall plan, what permanent level of water conservation are you expecting MMWD customers to maintain? What is your goal? Are we to maintain emergency conditions forever? The public needs to know your intent. Are we to continue to have no lawns and buckets in our showers? Are we going to permanently have to pay higher rates due to conservation measures? At what point do conservation measures not provide sufficient water supply? We don't see any information about this in any of your planning. And also, why are you not pushing back against the state legislators who are mandating additional housing units without providing funds or assistance to pay for the additional water and infrastructure that they need? your constituents need, here's the most important question of all. When are you going to address these questions? Your constituents deserve answers. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that. There's a lot to unpack there, but I really appreciate, and I'm sure my fellow board members do, how very thoughtful you have been in presenting that. So thank you. I don't know that we can address all of that today. I think we can say that we are looking at exactly those questions. We don't have authority over land use planning, so I'm going to ask Ben to address that. That has been an ongoing challenge for special districts like ours that don't have that jurisdiction. But Ben, do you feel comfortable responding to that?
There was a lot there. And the board, we will be bringing to the board considerations of new connections during this drought. I think the question was going more long-term, and that is part of our ongoing planning effort to look at demand and supply. And I do think much of the conservation initiatives that the board has been asking for from staff and discussing will result in long-term savings. These, during this current drought, understand bucket in the shower, but as we really begin to focus, as we are, on replacing lawns and really going big in terms of incentives and tools to support our customers to do that, those are sustained savings for the long term. So we are thinking about doing that. We do believe there's a lot of capacity. Our demand doubles, as we all know here, but maybe not all the customers know, in the summer for irrigation. So that's our target, to work with our customers to shift to a more landscaping approach that's more consistent with the arid climate that we're in, and likely that's going to get more pronounced in the years ahead. So we do see a lot of opportunities in conservation, but we're also talking about expanding our recycled water program, looking at regional groundwater storage. So there's a tremendous amount of activities that we are looking at to enhance the resiliency of our water supply.
We have two more speakers. The first is Larry Minikes and the second is Paul Primo. So go ahead, Mr. Minikes.
Thank you. It's been a good conversation this morning. I'm going to read something very brief to you from the CWPP of Siskiyou County 2019, and they're referring to their water resources. During a wildfire, and let me put this into context. They've had 9 major fires there since 2014, hundreds of thousands of acres. They've lost hundreds of homes. So they're coming at the CWPP from a different direction than Marin County. And it's important to understand what they're saying here. During a wildfire emergency, this water source network becomes a critical factor for suppression personnel in conducting safe and effective operations, including evacuation assistance. It is imperative that each community discuss specific water resource issues with their local fire suppression representatives, and that community leaders ensure the subject is addressed in their local level CWPP. We are sort of in a bubble here. We are not discussing this outside of the municipality. And I think it's very important, considering everything that's going on, that we bring this conversation into this context, looking at what is critical for the fire suppression personnel in this county. That's number one. Director Russell made an early comment about the rate impact, and that all the directors know the rate impact and don't really need to see it. I in particular would like to see how each scenario will affect rates. I think the public would be very interested in that. I think there's one other big problem here, and that's the current mission of this board, and that this has to be addressed. And it's understood that that the board wants to deliver high quality, that the district wants to deliver high quality water to people. But at affordable prices is really problematic, because how do you even define what affordable prices are? And isn't it time to reconsider a mission where water resiliency, where resiliency in the system is the most important thing? And I would encourage you during this 10-year process, planning process, to reconsider the mission. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah.
I'll just say for myself, since I have to jump off now, I appreciate your comments. I think affordability is part of the mission. I mean, I'm happy to have that conversation with you and certainly with the board, but particularly in this moment when we are all, I think, very appropriately focused on equity and ensuring that everybody has access to clean, safe, healthy water on a reliable basis. Affordability has to be part of that, and we need to be cognizant of it. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to invest in the ways that we need to, but we also need to invest in ways that are inclusive in our community. But I'm happy to have that conversation with you further. And Terry, I'm going to apologize. I have to step away for the rest of the questions because I'm already late for my next call. But I want to thank Melissa especially and the team at Raftellus for their help with this, and my fellow board members and the staff. This has been a robust conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, folks, I too, I have a commitment I need to move to as well. I don't know if that causes any particular issues, but same appreciations for all the work, and look forward to this conversation continuing, because it's obviously we're not done and we've got good work to do.
Okay.
Mr. Paul Primo. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, two areas I'm curious about and seek clarification. First is desalination. I think I heard that the board has instructed the consultant to not consider desalination. I may be unclear, maybe wrong on that. And then secondly, I thought I heard that desal is mentioned in the fourth scenario. So I'd like to get some clarification on that as the basis for excluding it, or whether or not, for example, some preliminary studies have been done on indeed the significant capital costs. We know it's high, but I don't know what it is as a function of the scale and the size of the plant. Huntington Beach is moving forward. There might be some good data there. So that's number one, desal. Where is it? Where do you stand on it, and why? Number two is the debt levels that you're assuming, and therefore the basis for those debt levels. In custom scenario number one, I wrote down that you are looking at total investment of $322.2 million, and that 50 million of that would be funded by debt. I get that to be about 15%. In custom scenario number two, total investment $390.8 million, 100 million in debt, or 25%. What are the criteria for that preliminary, if that's what it is, allocation of debt funding? And then by implication, obviously, the rest is going to be paid by ratepayers in some sort of a pay-go basis for on the order of $250 to $300 million over the 10-year period. So those are the 2 points I'd like some clarification on and would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't want to get into too much of a Q&A, but desal is, that's correct. It's in one of those scenarios, and we got some feedback. The question is it going to be in our 10-year plan? And that has yet to be determined because the board we haven't concluded this exercise. But it is very costly in capital and operating. The debt's developed looking at projects and opportunities to leverage our revenue to tackle, obviously, some of these larger projects. So that's how that was developed.
And I think Mr. Roberts actually had his hand up this time, so I'm going to call on him.
Hooray, yes.
Okay.
An observation and a question.
We know that we're going to be facing inflation over the 10-year period. And so that means we have a moving target as to what the total capital requirement is and the financing methods that will be brought to bear to cover those costs. And I don't see anywhere any description of whether or not the numbers you're dealing with are inflated or whether those are current costs. And I think it would also be terribly useful if you start out by telling all of us what the total capital need would be in order to bring the district up to industry standards over the 10-year period. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further speakers.
Ben, isn't the answer to Roger's question scenario 4, which is proactive and contemporary?
That is correct. I think generally it wouldn't address all the pipes, but generally that level of investment, I think, would bring us to the highest standard.
And 820 million, something like that.
Yeah. And these current costs that you're seeing on the projects are current dollars. The model that looks at the revenue needed inflates the projects annually.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you were looking at slide 20, the presentation was posted on the website, you can actually see the forecast escalation assumptions we use for various categories.
Okay. And then I had a question, and I know everybody probably wants to get going, but on the groundwater study or whatever that's included in scenario 2 for 2 million, what is that referring to?
So that's to, and at this stage is a bit of a placeholder, but that's to pursue a regional effort. So we would be contributing to a regional effort to look at during wet years, potentially store water. Unfortunately, we don't have a groundwater basin that's size or productiveness right in the county. So, but there's 2 very large ones in the north where we have partners and would get water. So the theory is, let's just say Santa Rosa Plains groundwater basin, which is very large. In wet years, the regional coalition, let's say the retailers from Sonoma Water, would store water in the ground during wet years, and during times of drought, we would pull it out. It's fairly attractive one. Obviously, groundwater storage doesn't have issues that building new storage would have. And it's there, and it actually benefits the groundwater basin as well as benefits water needs during times of drought. So that's the concept. And the infrastructure to move the water is already in place. There may need to be some wellhead treatment.
Yeah.
That's the concept.
Yeah. Petaluma Groundwater has a website if anybody's interested. So they've got a whole encyclopedia about the Petaluma groundwater basin, which is huge.
It is. And that would be the second potential basin that we would look at partnering. And potentially we would just partner with Petaluma. I mean, I'm right. This is at this point just conceptual.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting thing to look at for sure.
Keep in mind, Larry, that the peak flow in the Russian River during flood is 30,000 acre feet per day, which is more than our total usage in a year, every day. So, you know, I think the conjunctive use is more aimed at getting Sonoma to do the work than the heavy lifting, because as Ben said, you already have the infrastructure. The further down you come into the system, like Petaluma, you got to develop the water or buy it from Sonoma and put it in the ground and try to keep track of it.
So it's a little trickier, but if we went to the normal approach of the conjunctive reuse, which is basically capturing the water, settling out the dirt, letting it go into the groundwater, either percolation or pump it, and then pump it back out when Sonoma needs it to sell it to us. I think that one makes perfect sense to me. It's been a discussion of the WAC for a while now. And I think it's got great potential because, like I say, the volumes are so large and it really has no impact on the Russian River because, you know, the fish don't need 30,000 acre feet of floodwater to blast them into the ocean when
Yeah,
it's
well,
raining.
yeah, maybe we need to plan on making some financial contribution, you know, so we have some skin in the game.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's, I think, exactly why it's in the 10-year plan, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Director Russell, I think the meeting is yours at this point. So we have no more public comments, Terry?
That is correct.
So I should get going too. I mean, so I don't mean to.
Director Russell, I think we're ready for you to adjourn if you'd like.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't following what you were giving me. I'm thinking, well, I've already kind of asked all my questions. But, you know, Ben, one more comment before we go. The point that I was trying to get at is that I think we recognize you're not going to paint a tank that doesn't need to be painted, but that's not really the point. That comparing us to averages, like I say, it's useful. In fact, I would take objection to Roger Roberts' question of saying, what would it take to bring us up to standard? I think we already are at standard. Now, those aren't standards, things like repainting every 22 years. Those are guidelines maybe at the best, but they're not standards. And so I think that's kind of a misconstrued look at what we're talking about. Sure, we can do better about those kind of things, but basically, I think that we're in pretty good shape in general, you know, in terms of meeting industry standards. But we have weak spots like the cast iron pipe and the plastic laterals and those kind of cats. So anyway, with that, I will move to adjourn the meeting and look forward to the next one.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you all. See you.
See you soon.